She was a single mom just trying to survive, working long shifts, raising her baby alone, and still haunted by the memory of one unforgettable night in New York. But everything changed the morning she found a naked man in her bathroom, and not just any man. He was the billionaire father of her baby, and he had no idea how he got there. What follows is a heart-pounding journey filled with secrets, danger, and a love story that defies judgment, class, and betrayal. Stay until the end, because this isn't just a love story. It's a lesson for anyone who's ever been told they weren't enough. The morning sun filtered gently through the lace curtains of Grace Miller's tiny kitchen, casting soft golden rays across the floor. The scent of warm formula and toasted oats filled the air as she fed her 10-month-old son, Caleb, who giggled between bites, his chubby fingers reaching for her face. Grace smiled, tired but content in the only life she knew now, quiet, careful, and endlessly devoted to the small boy in her arms. Her messy bun, faded sweatshirt, and weary eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights and long diner shifts. Yet she carried herself with a kind of grace that only mothers possessed. Outside, the world was silent. No cars, no neighbors, just the rustling of pine trees and the occasional chirp of birds greeting the new day. It was supposed to be peaceful, safe. Until it wasn't. A strange sound interrupted the calm, a soft hiss like water cascading onto tile. She froze. The shower was running. Grace blinked, confused. Her brows furrowed as she looked down the hallway toward the bathroom. Caleb cooed, unaware of the change in the air. Her heart began to thump in her chest like a warning drum. She lived alone. No one was supposed to be here. An icy chill ran through her spine. She grabbed Caleb and tiptoed to his crib, placing him down gently, whispering, "Shh, baby. Stay here for Mama." He smiled, trusting, unaware. Grace moved to the kitchen, trembling fingers curling around the handle of a heavy frying pan. It was the only weapon she had. She crept toward the bathroom, her breath shallow, each step echoing louder in her mind than in the hallway. She stopped at the door. Steam billowed from underneath it, carrying with it the faint smell of expensive cologne, clean, musky, and familiar. Her fingers tightened around the pan. She pushed the door open slowly. The bathroom was filled with fog, the mirror blurred, water pounding against porcelain. A tall figure stood under the spray, head tilted back, steam curling around his shoulders. He turned toward her at the sound of the creak. And she screamed. "Who are you?" The man stumbled back, startled, hands raised in confusion. He was completely naked, water dripping from his toned chest, dark hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes locked on hers, wide with recognition. "Grace?" he said, almost breathless. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She lowered the frying pan slightly, her knees threatening to buckle. She knew that voice. She knew those eyes. Blue-gray, intense, unforgettable. She took a shaky step back, unable to breathe. "No, it can't be," she whispered, more to herself than to him. But it was. Nick Westwood, the man she met during a lonely night in New York. The man who had disappeared from her life like a ghost. The man she had thought of every night since. Even as she held the baby he didn't know existed. And now he was here, in her bathroom, naked, confused, and looking at her like she was the only person in the world that mattered. The frying pan clattered to the floor, the sound ringing through the hallway like a gunshot. Grace stood frozen, her hand trembling as she backed away from the steamy doorway. The man, no, Nick, took a cautious step toward her, water still dripping from his skin onto the tile floor. His voice was softer now, full of confusion and something else, something deeper. "Grace, it's really you." Her lips parted in disbelief. Her brain couldn't catch up. She stared at him, trying to put the pieces together. Nick Westwood, the same man she had met in that candlelit jazz bar in Manhattan a year ago. The one who bought her a drink when she sat alone, aching from a breakup and a recent miscarriage. The man who made her laugh when she hadn't in months, who kissed her like she was the only woman in the world, who disappeared the next morning without even leaving his number. And now he was standing in her bathroom, naked and very real. "What the hell are you doing here, Nick?" she whispered, eyes wide. "How did you get into my house?" "I don't know," he said, running a shaky hand through his wet hair. "The last thing I remember, I was at a meeting with my brother. Then I blacked out. I woke up on your couch, my head spinning. I thought I was dreaming. I swear I didn't break in. I didn't even know where I was." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to be terrified, furious, or relieved. Was this fate? A cruel joke? A miracle? "I should call the police," she said, stepping back again, her voice shaking. "You can," he said gently, raising his hands. "But please, just wait. Let me explain." She hesitated, eyes flicking between the stranger she once trusted for one vulnerable night and the reality crashing into her now. "You're Nick Westwood," she said slowly. "You're a billionaire. You live in Manhattan penthouses. You don't just wake up in a single mom's guest room in the middle of nowhere." Nick looked down, then into her eyes again. His expression was haunted. "I know how crazy it sounds, but I'm telling you the truth, Grace. I don't remember how I got here. Someone drugged me. It had to be my brother." Grace blinked. "What?" "I found something," he said, voice low. "He's been using the company to funnel money through fake developments overseas. I confronted him. We fought. And the next thing I know, I'm here." She stared at him, unsure if she should believe any of this. But then, a soft cry echoed from down the hallway. "Caleb." Grace's heart sank. She turned, ready to run to her son. But Nick's voice stopped her. "Is that—" She froze. He took a small step forward, his voice shaking. "Is that your baby?" Grace slowly turned to face him again. Her throat was dry. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. "Our baby," she said, barely above a whisper. Time froze. Nick's eyes widened, the color draining from his face. He stumbled back a step, blinking like he didn't hear her right. What did you say?" "I tried to find you," Grace said, her voice breaking. "You disappeared. I didn't even know your last name until I saw you on TV months later. I didn't know how to reach you. But yes, that's your son." Nick's mouth fell open. For the first time in his life, the confident billionaire looked completely unsteady. "He's mine?" he whispered. Grace nodded slowly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "His name is Caleb." Nick sank to the floor, sitting back against the wall. His chest heaved as his mind reeled. "I have a son," he whispered almost to himself. "I have a son." Grace wanted to scream, cry, run, anything but stand there with her whole world unraveling again. But something about the way he said it, the way his voice cracked, made her stop. This man who once vanished like a dream had returned not just into her life, but into his child's. And nothing would ever be the same again. Nick sat on the edge of the couch, still dripping slightly from the shower, a borrowed towel wrapped around his waist and his soul unraveling. Across from him, Grace cradled Caleb in her arms, watching both men in her life with trembling hands and a pounding heart. The room was thick with unspoken emotion, years of absence, confusion, and unfinished sentences all buzzing under the surface like static electricity. Caleb reached toward Nick, his tiny fingers curious, his bright blue eyes wide. The same eyes that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. Nick swallowed hard, stunned, speechless. "He's beautiful," he whispered. "He's yours." Grace replied gently, her voice quieter than before, the weight of truth still new on her tongue. "Every part of him." Nick looked up at her, guilt washing over his face like a crashing wave. "I never meant to leave. That night, it meant more to me than I can explain. I tried to find you." Grace blinked, lips parting to respond, but then she heard it. Engines, tires crunching gravel. She turned toward the window, heart instantly racing. Two matte black SUVs pulled into her driveway, their tinted windows reflecting the overcast sky. Men in dark suits stepped out, their movements fast and purposeful. Her instincts screamed. Nick's face drained of all color. "They found me," he whispered, standing up, adrenaline snapping through his body. "Damn it! How did they find me this fast?" Grace clutched Caleb tighter. "Who are they? What do they want?" "My brother," he said, voice low, jaw clenched. "He wants me dead." Grace stared at him like he'd just said he could fly. "What? Why?" Nick pulled her toward the back door, eyes darting everywhere. "There's no time. I'll explain everything. Just please, we need to go. Now." Grace didn't hesitate. She grabbed Caleb's diaper bag, stuffed with only a few essentials, and followed Nick out the back door. The cold morning air hit her like a slap, but the fear numbed everything else. They ran through the yard, across the neighbor's field, and into the woods beyond her property. Grace didn't ask questions, only held her baby tight and followed the man who was suddenly her past, her present, and very possibly her danger. They didn't stop until they were far from the house, hidden behind a dense wall of trees. Grace bent over, gasping for breath, Caleb quiet in her arms, sensing the tension. Nick was pacing, running his hands through his hair. "I never wanted you or the baby anywhere near this." "What the hell is going on, Nick?" she finally demanded. "No more lies! Tell me everything!" He turned to her, his face raw and honest for the first time since she opened that bathroom door. "My brother Owen has been laundering money through real estate fronts, selling worthless properties overseas, hiding cash in shell companies. I found the files, proof. I was going to turn it in, expose him. But before I could, he had me drugged at a board meeting." He paused, breathing hard. "I woke up in a black car, barely conscious, and then nothing. Next thing I knew, I was on your couch. Somehow, even drugged and half out of my mind, I gave them your address, because somewhere deep in my head, I knew this was the only place I'd be safe." Grace stared at him, stunned, silent. She should have been furious. She should have told him to leave and never come back. But something inside her twisted, some part that still remembered the way he looked at her that night in New York, like she was the only woman in the world. "You trusted me, even when you were out cold?" she asked. Nick nodded. "I don't know why, I did. And I still do." Tears stung her eyes. She hated that he was pulling her into a world of lies, danger, and corruption. But she also saw the fear in his eyes, not just for himself, but for them. As the sound of tires faded in the distance, they both knew they couldn't go back. Not yet, but even as they hid among the trees, heartbeats thundering, something shifted between them. Trust. A fragile thread pulling two broken people together. And behind that fear, behind all the chaos, was something even scarier. Hope. The cabin was quiet, tucked away deep in the pines, past the winding gravel roads where even GPS gave up. It belonged to Grace's childhood friend Janie, who was out of state, and had always told Grace, "If you ever need a place to disappear, take the key. No questions asked." Now Grace needed that key more than ever. Nick leaned against the worn wood railing of the porch, watching as Grace buckled Caleb into a second-hand stroller. The late afternoon sun streamed through the canopy of leaves, painting everything in warm golden tones. It should have been peaceful. But beneath it all lingered tension, like thunder just beneath the horizon. Inside, the cabin was small and rustic, one bedroom, a creaky floor, and a kitchen stuck in 1984, but it was safe. More importantly, it was theirs for now. Days blurred together in a strange, slow rhythm. In the mornings, Nick made coffee while Grace fed Caleb. He learned to fold laundry and wipe mashed peas off the floor. She taught him how to swaddle a baby and warm up formula without making it boil. They fell into a kind of domestic rhythm that neither of them had ever known they needed. And in those quiet hours, away from the world and the chase, the walls began to fall. One evening, as Caleb napped in the bedroom, Grace sat beside Nick on the porch swing, her hands curled around a chipped mug of tea. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was waiting. It was trust, rebuilding itself slowly. I tried to find you, she finally said, staring into the trees. After New York. I went to that bar 3 nights in a row. I even called the hotel, but I didn't even know your last name. Nick's jaw clenched. I should have stayed. I should have left a number, a note, something. She turned to him. Why didn't you? I panicked, he said, voice low. It felt too real, too fast. One night with you, and I didn't feel like myself anymore. I felt like I belonged to someone. She didn't respond at first. Her eyes shimmered in the fading light, full of memories and hurt and maybe forgiveness. I thought it was just a fling, she whispered. I thought it was forever, he replied. Her breath caught. Later, as the wind cooled and night fell across the woods, they lit a small fire in the pit outside the cabin. Caleb giggled in Nick's lap, waving a tiny stuffed bear in the air as if it were a torch. Grace couldn't stop staring at them. This surreal image of a billionaire in borrowed jeans, his hands stained with soot, bouncing a baby and singing off-key lullabies. She saw something she didn't expect to find again. Family, one night, as stars bloomed across the dark sky like diamonds scattered across velvet. Grace wrapped Caleb in a blanket and placed him in the crib. When she came back out, Nick was waiting by the fire, a soft look in his eyes. She sat beside him, shoulder brushing his. The crackling of fire filled the silence between heartbeats. He turned to her slowly. I missed a year of his life, he said, barely above a whisper. The first smile, his first laugh, his first steps. I'll never get that back. She looked down, hands folded in her lap. Neither will I. I had to go through it all alone. Nick touched her hand gently. You won't be alone anymore. The stars blinked above them, quiet witnesses to the fragile moment. And then he leaned in. The kiss was soft, no fire, no frenzy, just warmth, just truth. His hand cradled her cheek, and she let her eyes fall closed. In that kiss, they weren't fugitives. They weren't a waitress and a billionaire. They were just two people finding each other again in the ruins of old pain. When they parted, she didn't pull away. He rested his forehead against hers and whispered, I don't want to miss another second. Not with him, not with you. She closed her eyes and let a tear fall, because somewhere in those woods, hiding from a world that was trying to tear them apart, Grace realized she was falling for him all over again. And this time he wasn't running. Peace is a fragile thing, especially when it doesn't belong to you. For a few precious days in that hidden cabin, Grace, Nick, and Caleb had found something close to a dream. Mornings with soft giggles, afternoons of quiet meals and learning each other's rhythms, evenings full of whispered stories and lingering touches. But dreams don't last when the world is hunting you, and reality came crashing down one storm-drenched night. It started with headlights, 3 sets, slicing through the trees like knives. Grace saw them through the rain-smeared window and froze. Her breath hitched. The porch light flickered. Caleb stirred in his crib, but didn't wake. Nick stood slowly from the small wooden table, his body suddenly still. They found us, he said softly. Grace's heart dropped. What do we do? I need you to hide, he said, already moving across the room. Take Caleb, stay quiet. Don't come out until I say. No, Nick! He grabbed her shoulders gently, his eyes fierce. Grace, please, I have to do this. For you, for him. She didn't want to let go. Not after finally getting him back, not after he kissed her like she mattered. But she nodded. She scooped Caleb into her arms, wrapped him in a thick blanket, and slipped into the back storage room, pulling the latch closed behind her. Her heart thundered like the storm outside. Rain pelted the roof like a warning. Thunder rolled through the trees. Nick stepped outside into the downpour, bareheaded, unarmed, and unafraid. There were 5 of them, dressed in black, armed, grim. And behind them, stepping out of the lead SUV like a ghost, was Owen Westwood. Tall, clean-cut, with a predator's smile. Well, well, Owen said, his voice cutting through the rain. Little brother always did like hide and seek. Nick didn't move. It's over, Owen. Owen smirked. You think hiding in the woods with your waitress girlfriend makes you a hero? You were always too soft for this family. No, Nick said, voice cold. You were always too rotten. He reached into his jacket slowly, pulling out a small silver flash drive. Owen's smile faltered. I backed up everything, Nick said. Every illegal deal, every transfer. The fake land purchases in Brazil, the ghost investors in Dubai. I've got names, dates, amounts. Owen's eyes darkened. Give it to me. Nick shook his head. I already sent a copy, but I figured you'd come anyway. And then sirens. Dozens of them. Red and blue lights flooded the trees, flashing through the rain. Men in tactical vests swarmed from the darkness, FBI. The armed guards turned too late. They were outnumbered, outflanked, and outmatched. Nick stood still as agents surrounded the cabin, shouting commands. Grace peeked from the hidden room, her heart pounding, Caleb asleep against her chest. Owen raised his hands, face pale. You son of a... Nick didn't flinch. I told you it was over. Within minutes, the agents had Owen and his men cuffed and loaded into waiting vehicles. The storm began to pass, leaving only the soft patter of rain on leaves. Grace stepped out into the clearing, barefoot and wide-eyed, holding Caleb tight. She ran to Nick, who was soaked, shivering and smiling. They met in the middle of the muddy yard and collapsed into each other's arms. It's over, he whispered, voice breaking. You're safe, she whispered back. We're safe. The rain poured down around them, but they didn't care. Caleb stirred between them, and Nick placed a trembling kiss on his son's head. For the first time in weeks, in years, Grace felt like she could breathe again. They weren't just surviving anymore. They had won. It's strange how much life can change in just a few months. The man who once lived in penthouses and wore $1,000 suits now spent his mornings in jeans, sipping black coffee on a front porch in small-town Oregon. Nick Westwood had walked away from the boardrooms, the headlines, and the weight of a last name that once meant everything. He didn't sell off the Westwood empire. He left it, quietly, proudly. He chose something rarer than power, peace. He bought a modest craftsman house on the edge of town, not far from where Grace had once lived alone, counting pennies and changing diapers. Now they were a family. And the house echoed with love. Nick didn't stop working. He just started working differently. He used his resources to launch the Miller Foundation, named after Grace, a tribute to her strength. Its mission? To provide support, housing, childcare, and education to single mothers, underprivileged children, and those society too often forgot. No headlines, no press, just heart. Every Thursday, Nick taught a budgeting class at the community center. Every Saturday, Grace ran a parenting circle and cooked hot meals with other moms. And every evening, they read to Caleb before bed, always finishing with Goodnight Moon, his favorite. They weren't perfect. They still argued sometimes, about diapers, about dinner, about whether Nick should really be allowed to teach Caleb how to climb trees at age 2. But they laughed too, more than ever. Then came the wedding. It was small, no press, no pomp, just wildflowers in mason jars, a handmade arch, and Grace walking barefoot down the aisle in a white sundress, her hair loose, her smile trembling. Nick waited with tears in his eyes, holding Caleb in his arms as she reached him. The town had once whispered about Grace behind her back. She was knocked up. A waitress with no ring. Bet she trapped him. But on that day, those same people stood to applaud. Janie was her maid of honor. The sheriff, who once eyed Nick with suspicion, now nodded with respect. Even the diner regulars came, bringing hand-painted signs and homemade pie. Because truth had a way of shining through the fog. They saw now what they hadn't before. Grace hadn't trapped Nick. She had saved him. And Nick, in turn, had honored her, stood by her, chosen her. And that made people rethink everything. Grace had never wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted love, safety, and a little kindness. But she became more. A quiet revolution in a floral dress. A reminder that people's worth isn't written on resumes or bank accounts or skin. She stood beside Nick at the altar and whispered, "We made it." And he whispered back, "We're just getting started." As they kissed, Caleb clapped and giggled from the grass. No helicopters, no reporters, just family, friends, and forgiveness. Over time, the whispers faded. In their place came stories about how Grace helped a teen mom find housing, about how Nick paid off the town's school lunch debt, about how the rich man and the waitress turned heartbreak into something beautiful. And the lesson? True worth has nothing to do with money. Love is not measured in status, race, background, or gossip. Love is measured in the quiet choices, to stay, to fight, to believe in someone when the world turns its back. We live in a society that too often divides, that judges, that labels. But Grace and Nick, white, wealthy, working class, flawed, and human, proved that none of those things matter when hearts are open. They taught their town, and maybe the world, that the only label that really counts is family. And in the end, the waitress and the billionaire didn't just fall in love. They rewrote the ending, together.